Hi, and welcome back to my photography channel. So, we're down to spot number 3. It's been a couple of weeks since I did my last entry. And this is my last week of vacation here in Sweden. It's a Friday and I'm off the last day, so I thought this would be a good day to record the last entry. And we're down to spot number 3 now, which makes this very exciting for me, of course. And hopefully for someone else as well. This particular camera I had my eyes on for a while, but I did get it quite late. I got it at the time I was starting up with or getting back into film photography again. It's a classic camera and it was made in the 60s and 70s, and one of those iconic cameras, which a lot of other cameras I've been having on my list as well, of course, but this one I think a lot of people will recognize. And without further ado, let's present number 3, the classic Spotmatic SP. So the Spotmatic SP is a very simple camera. They came out with a lot of other models after this model. There is the AES, the ES2, the SP500, the SP1000, and also the Spotmatic F, among other ones. But I think this the SP is the most iconic model, for me at least. So it's a very simple camera, and it was the first SLR that had built-in metering through the lens in such a small camera body. And it's got a little lever here on the side that you activate the metering with. And you get up to 1/1000th of a second in shutter speed. And you get a self-timer. And there isn't really much else on the camera. You get a clip-on hot shoe that you put on like this. But otherwise it's just a pure camera, shooting camera. Not much other features. It got a M42 mount, which is a very, very good mount because it has get a lot of manufacturers making M42 lenses. And for the Spotmatic series, you have the beautiful M42 mount Takumar lenses, which are spectacular lenses. And this is probably my favorite of them all, the Takumar 50mm f1.4 8-element lens. It's usually the one sitting on my Spotmatic at all times, but I have a few other favorites as well that I can show you. You get a beautiful 28mm lens, f3.5, very, very good 28mm lens. You get the sort of kit lens that you get with a lot of Spotmatic cameras when you buy them nowadays. The 55mm f1.8, also very, very nice lens. For a kit lens, it's spectacular. And then one I bought quite recently actually, the 23mm f2.3. I don't know if you can see into it, but beautiful lens. This one is one of the bigger lenses that I acquired for my Spotmatic. But there is also the 85mm f1.8, which I owned in the past as well, which is just a beautiful lens, a beautiful Takumar lens. Later on, Pentax introduced their K-mount for their Pentax cameras, and a model like the K1000, for example, is a very popular camera for students and younger photographers to get into film photography with. And that's because the camera is easy to find and it's cheap. They made a lot of K1000s, so it's a great camera, and I believe it has metering as well built into it. But I believe the Spotmatic is also a perfect camera to get into, especially if you want to learn everything and you can do everything manual on the camera. You don't have too many other features to get you distracted and so on. It's still very easy to find. I've seen a lot of silver SPs around. The black version is a bit tricky to find nowadays. it's starting to get harder to find. I've been trying to get one for a while now in good condition, and it's not very easy. But the silver SP, they can be found quite easily, and they're not very expensive either. So that's very good. So why do I hold the Spotmatic SP in such high regard, and why is it on number 3 on my list? Well, to begin with, it's a beautiful camera to look at. And I think for a lot of people, including me, that get into film photography and vintage camera, the look is important. And the Spotmatic SP has that classic, iconic look. And I think it's one of the most iconic cameras over the years. And I've seen a lot of other people including it on their favorite lists as well. And it was a very popular camera back in the days as well. And it's not that hard to find and not that expensive to get. So it's available to a lot of people. It's very, very well built. It's a very fun camera to shoot with. It's easy. It doesn't have a lot of features to get you distracted and so on. And I think that's also one of the reasons that a lot of people like using it to get into film photography. But I think the number one point besides the look would be the M42 Takumar lenses. I talked a little bit about the lenses I like to use before. And I know you always get this comparison with like the Leica lenses and so on. And it's a very difficult comparison to make in my mind, because some lenses just have a lot of character. And I think the Takumar lenses got that in abundance. All the Takumar lenses I've used has been very, very well built. They're small, very, very nice to use. They all have like a very smooth focus ring and very well built. And the images you get from them are great in my mind. A lot of character. And as I explained earlier, and a lot of other people can agree with, I think, when you shoot film photography and get into vintage lenses and so on, it's the character you're after a lot of the times, and not the sharp and crisp images of those modern lenses. So yeah, that's a big pro for the Spotmatic SP. Yeah, we're down to spot number 2. I can feel the excitement bubbling up inside me. Because this camera, this could easily be my number 1 in the future as well. It's quickly became one of my most fun camera to use, and one of the most precious one, and something that I can't imagine myself selling in the future, to be honest. I don't expect to see this camera on many other people's lists, which is also quite fun and exciting. It's a pretty rare camera, and it's one that they didn't produce many of. In fact, I think something like 4,000 cameras were produced. And without further ado, let's introduce number 2. It's the Konica Konishiruku Pearl 4 folder camera, medium format camera. Look at this camera. Absolutely beautiful. So the Konica Pearl 4 was made in 1958, as I said, and it was produced in the sunset of the folder camera era. And as such, they didn't produce many, as I said, and something like 4,000 copies. And that means that not many people have shot or handled the Konica Pearl 4. One of their rivals at the time would be something like the Zeiss Ikon Ikonta series folder camera that has somewhat of the same features as the Konica Pearl 4. The Konica Pearl 4 being a little bit smaller. It has a rangefinder. It's a medium format camera, 645. Like its predecessor, the Pearl 3, it has a 75mm Hexar f3.5 lens and a Seikosha shutter, leaf shutter. It handles speed up to 1/500th of a second, and it's got a redesigned brilliant viewfinder with frame lens inside it. One of the best brilliant bright viewfinders of a folder camera from that area, or ever, I think. It has an advanced, reliable autofilm advance mechanism, making the film advance automatically. So if we get into some of the handling of the Konica Pearl 4, it's pretty straightforward, and I think people using folders in the past, I believe it's quite similar. This is the first folder for me, so it took some getting used to in the beginning. So you set your aperture and shutter speed here on the respective rings here, and they will move at the same time. And if you want to move them independently of each other, you have to press this EV lever here. Then you can set them independently, and then you will move one of them and they will move at the same time, which makes it quite fast when you have set the exposure and you want to move in the same sort of lighting conditions. But in the beginning it can be a bit cumbersome to many people, I believe. You have your focus ring here, and you will actually have to have the focus set at the top here to be able to fold the camera afterwards. So that's very important as well. Then you will cock the shutter with this lever here. Press that down, and then you just press the shutter up there. So it's pretty straightforward, nothing really strange there when you get used to it. So when you have set the exposure and everything and press the shutter, you will see here on the frame counter which frame you're on, and then you're just advancing the film by turning the knob to the left, and you get to the next frame. To load and unload the film, you just turn the knobs here on the bottom respectively. You open the back here of the camera, and then you just load the film. I think people being familiar with folder cameras or medium format cameras in general, it's quite a common mechanism to use. So nothing special or strange there. Otherwise, the viewfinder, as I said, I read a lot about that one on the Konica Pearl 4. It's supposed to be one of the brightest and best viewfinders of any folder from that era, which is quite important on these old cameras. I read that the rangefinder patch was very easy to see in all lighting conditions, and especially like in backlit conditions, but I find it a little bit tricky to see sometimes, to be honest. But in most conditions it works fine, and it is visible in bright conditions as well. So it works fine, I think. So to some negative things to say about the lovely Konica Pearl 4 camera. It gets increasingly difficult to say anything negative about the cameras here on the higher spots on my list, but I suppose operating the camera isn't the fastest, but like the Spotmatic, I mean, if you get into this type of camera, a folder camera from this era, you know that from beforehand. So it shouldn't be like a huge surprise and not a huge disappointment, I think. Yeah, that is not a fast camera. You have to get used to setting the aperture and shutter and use the EV lever there, I suppose. It will be a bit negative for some people. The lens might be a con as well. It's a bit of a compromise, and like on a 35 format camera, it translates to like a 45mm lens. So it is not wide enough for a good landscape lens, and it's not long enough telephoto for a good portrait lens, for example. So it's a bit of a compromise and something in between, but it's a bit like using those rangefinder compact cameras. They usually have something like a 40mm lens, so I'm quite used to that. And it's also the type of camera that you bring around more, I think, than another bigger medium format. So you bring it a lot on town and so on. It's a perfect document sort of focal length, I think, for documenting stuff that you see around you and that you pass around town and so on. So for me, it's a pretty fun lens, to be honest. And you're not limited to like a landscape photography lens or a portrait lens or whatever. So I think it's a bit of a sweet spot, I think. So I gotta come with some type of conclusion about this wonderful camera, the Konica Pearl 4. To begin with, I was very, very lucky to get this camera. I met up with a Swedish guy here from a marketplace. He was selling it for 500 euros or around that amount. He had it newly serviced, which is very important with these older folded cameras, where the fabric here usually breaks quite easily and you get holes and light leaks and so on. But everything was newly serviced, and after his explanation about how to operate the camera and how rare it was, and a little bit more about the history of the camera and so on, I just fell in love with it right away, and I thought it would be the perfect folder camera to start with. And honestly, I haven't regretted buying it 1 second afterwards. It's been one of the cameras that I bring with me most of the time, actually. Almost more than my M240 digital Leica camera. And usually it goes next to the M240 in my bag, since it's so light and doesn't take much space when you fold it up and so on. So I've been shooting a lot of Kodak Gold 120 film with it, and the images I get out from it, getting back from the lab, look very, very pleasing to my eyes, at least. And yeah, it's increasingly more and more fun every day I use it. So it might even be my number one in the future. It's not impossible at all. So I can highly recommend this wonderful camera. It's a joy to use if you can get it. It has a steep price tag, but considering how rare it was or is, and how much features in comparison to other folded cameras of this era it has, I think it's worth it. And like the name suggests, it's like a pearl in an oyster. It will only sort of increase its value over time, I think. So I don't think you will regret getting it, to be honest. Konica Pearl 4, number 2. Welcome back. Welcome back to the last entry. Last entry of this episode and the last entry of this series. My 10 favorite film cameras. It's been quite a journey thus far. I know this episode is turning out to be a much longer episode than I anticipated in the beginning. So I will try to keep it as brief as possible. Even though the number one spot deserves a little bit more attention. But this camera is well documented, and you can find tons of information on the internet if you're curious about it and the history and what it's capable of. Very, very popular camera, and some of you might know which camera I'm talking about. So without further ado, let's introduce you to the number one camera on my list. Here it is, the cat's out of the bag. Not a surprise anymore. The Nikon FM3a. And I know it's not a very original choice to put an FM3a on top of a list these days. It's a favorite for a lot of people out there, photographers. But I'm gonna tell you my reasons for it being and taking the number one spot on my list. Might be some differences to others, I'm not sure. So here we go. Just some other features that it has that makes it to be considered one of the best, if not the best, SLR ever made, manual camera anyway. It has a very well placed exposure button right underneath the rewind lever there. You got the exposure compensation in the same place as with the Nikon FE2 and Nikon FM2. Get a very, very good meter inside it. I think one of the best. It's a 60% centigrade metering. The viewfinder, also one of the best. Very, very good coverage in that one. And pretty good information in there as well. You see the exposure compensation icon at the top, telling you what amount you have chosen. You have a exposure lever on the side there, telling you what shutter speed and aperture you have chosen. You have aperture priority mode. Yeah, pretty much everything you need in this camera. It's also DX coded, which makes the film automatically feel what speed you're using as well. So yeah, great features and all you need in a photography tool, to be honest. So let's get into a little bit of a brief history around the FM3a, some background to it. It was a bit of an odd choice to go and make this camera at the time it was made. It was made in 2001, and they continued to making it until 2006. And at that time, they already had some models, or a lot of models out there, and other manufacturers as well with autofocus. So the market was sort of used to cameras with a lot of features and autofocus. And a lot of professional photographers and enthusiasts alike used the autofocus and feature-packed cameras in their work, and demanded that sort of that functionality already. So the FM3a was a real throwback to some of the earlier machines like the Nikon FE2 and Nikon FM2. But apparently they know that some part of the fan base wanted a classic manual camera, but a new model that could be depended on for a few years to come. So that's why they decided to make the Nikon FM3a. And with the demand of such a camera, there was also the same kind of demand for a camera that would be very, very well built and could withstand a lot of pressure and harsh environments and so on. And while the FM2 has a lot of that going for it, very, very well built camera and so on, sort of lacked some of the automatic features that the Nikon FE2 had, for example. And the other way around as well. The Nikon FE2 lacked some of the sort of manual features like functioning on all the shutter speeds without the battery and so on. So they took the best, as I said, from the FE2 and the Nikon FE2 and put everything into this camera body. So this camera works up until 1/4000th of a second without a battery, which is quite spectacular. So the shutter on this one is apparently very, very well built and one of a kind, as far as I understand. Just some other features that it has that makes it to be considered one of the best, if not the best, SLR ever made, manual camera anyway. It has a very well placed exposure button right underneath the rewind lever there. You got the exposure compensation in the same place as with the Nikon FE2 and Nikon FM2. Get a very, very good meter inside it. I think one of the best. It's a 60% centigrade metering. The viewfinder, also one of the best. Very, very good coverage in that one. And pretty good information in there as well. You see the exposure compensation icon at the top, telling you what amount you have chosen. You have a exposure lever on the side there, telling you what shutter speed and aperture you have chosen. You have aperture priority mode. Yeah, pretty much everything you need in this camera. It's also DX coded, which makes the film automatically feel what speed you're using as well. So yeah, great features and all you need in a photography tool, to be honest. So with those specs out of the way, I'm just going to take you into some of my thought process in getting this camera to begin with, and why it's on spot number 1 on my list. And back when I shot film the last time, I really didn't search for any manual camera. I was already also into autofocus cameras. So I had the Nikon F100 and never really considered the Nikon FM3. I actually didn't know much about it at the time. So before getting this camera, I was in the market for a Nikon FM2. And I was searching for a good copy of that and reading a lot of lovely stuff about the Nikon FM2. And I know how loved it was among photographers for its ruggedness and ability to shoot without a battery and so on. But I read so much about the Nikon FM3a at that time. And I assessed quite quickly that this was the camera. This was the pinnacle of any manual focus camera. I understood that quite clearly. So, and also the thought appealed to me to get a newer camera body that would last me years ahead and not get a beat up FM2 that would might break in a year or two. So that was one of the main reasons for me getting into the FM3a. So I began looking for something that wasn't too overpriced, and this was like 1.5 years ago. So that was just before the prices skyrocketed. And I found a guy selling one for around 700 euros at the time in mint condition as well. And it was also newly serviced. So yeah, that felt like a really good deal. So I jumped on that, to be honest. So besides being sort of the logical choice instead of the FM2 and getting that great of a deal, it sort of ticks the same boxes as my Nikon FE2 does, that I also love to use. And that got me into film photography, as I told you earlier. Just a sort of perfect balance, but besides the stuff I get in the Nikon FE2, I also get things from the FM2 that I was about to get. So it makes it even more special, I think. I think the only thing that I don't really like on this camera is the italic styled writing here on the Nikon name. It's a minor thing, I know, but if you're into design of the cameras and so on, it's for me it's thing I sort of rubbed me the wrong way in the beginning, but I got used to it. So now I just love that it looks a little bit different from the FE2. But otherwise, I mean, the ability to use the F-mount lenses here, like the 28mm 2.8 AIS lens that I love using on the FE2 as well. This one, very good landscape lens, the 20mm f3.5. And I like to team the FM3a a lot together with a digital DF here, like the only digital camera body that I still use besides D4. So, and this is also modeled from the FM2, I believe, to begin with. So, yeah, this looks cooler though, but yeah, just have all those features that I feel I loved in the Nikon FE2, but in a greater way, in a nice package. Newer as well, last me longer hopefully. It's perfect sort of balance when it comes to features and everything packed into this little camera. Amazing. So that's it, the end. Finally, I'm done. But before I go, I just wanted to say one more thing. I use this platform to say thank you to anyone that want to watch these videos. While it's not the number one reason for me to make these videos, because I enjoy sort of creating anything and give something back to the community. I'm just astounded anyone want to watch anything I do, so I very much appreciate that. And if anyone wants to leave a comment, that would be really cool too. I think that's one of the main reasons for me making these videos at all, to sort of get into discussions about film cameras and photography, because that's what I do on other people's YouTube content. So if anyone wants to leave a comment for me, that would be really cool, I think. Also, I wanted to make some honorable mentions. These are the cameras that I love using and that I've loved used over the years. And you can't squeeze all the film cameras into the list, I know that. Something I use a lot nowadays is this one that I also made a little bit of a review on the camera as well, the Polaroid Now. Just got into Polaroid the last year, a lot of fun with that. Also this little point and shoot, the Konica A4, great little point and shoot camera. It's like the big mini, but another version of it with a little bit of a close-up function as well. Great little camera. Couldn't make the list though, but I'm using that a lot too. And then, like probably a lot of other people, they get something inherited from their relatives. So this used to be my father's camera, the Kodak Retinet 1A. Just sort of refurbished this a little bit and started using it, and I haven't developed my first roll from it yet, but this of course has most sentimental value for me. So it's gonna be fun seeing what the pictures look like when I develop them. So that's it. A lot of other cameras sold over the years, and I will probably get some of them back at some point as well. And some of the cameras on the list I'm sure will switch places in a while, but that's it for now. I feel happy I did this, so thank you for watching. Subscribe if you like and hit the like button. Thank you. Bye bye.